The next item of business is a debate on motion 15530 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on Prisoners Early Release Scotland Bill, Emergency Bill motion. And I remind members that as per Rule 11.3.1h of Standing Orders, the question on this motion will be put immediately after the debate. And I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to speak to and move the motion. Up to 5 minutes, Minister.
Presiding Officer, I am seeking Parliament's agreement to treat the Prisoners Early Release Scotland Bill under the emergency procedure provided for in Parliament's Standing Orders. In doing so, let me recognise at the outset that any ask of Parliament to treat a bill under such a process should be where the circumstances require it. Presiding Officer, let me set out why the circumstances here do merit this bill being treated through the emergency procedure. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that for all those who live or work in our prison estate, the Scottish Prison Service is able to maintain safety and good order. To protect victims and public safety, the Scottish Prison Service must be able to accommodate those who pose the greatest risk of harm. It must also be able to support rehabilitation in order to reduce reoffending. In previous statements to Parliament, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has set out the scale of the challenge we face as a result of the rising prison population. The prison population has often exceeded 8,300 this year, and the latest prison population projections indicate the prison population will likely continue to increase into January 2025, reaching critical levels. This pressure directly impacts on staff and prisoners. Visits to prisoners are becoming difficult to maintain, and there are increasing challenges to the effective delivery of healthcare. A high population also reduces the capacity of the Scottish Prison Service to facilitate purposeful activity and support rehabilitation. This is essential in preparing individuals for reintegration into the community and, of course, to bring down reoffending. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has set out to Parliament the range of actions being taken to address the rising prison population. However, many of those actions will take time to have effect. Further urgent and sustainable action is needed now. The Justice Secretary therefore announced on the 10th of October she would seek to introduce legislation in November and would ask Parliament to agree to treat this under the emergency bill procedure. It should therefore be no surprise then that we seek to do this now. The Prisoners Early Release Scotland Bill, if agreed, will allow for the prison population to be reduced at pace and for this reduction to be maintained. Presiding Officer, we need to accelerate action that will reduce the population in a sustainable way. Progressing this bill under the emergency procedure is necessary because of the urgency of the situation and is proportionate to the scale of the challenge we face. We need to act urgently to ensure prisons continue to function safely and effectively and can accommodate those who pose the greatest risk of harm. Any unnecessary delay increases the risks to the safety, security and good order of our prisons. If Parliament agrees to treat the bill under the emergency procedure, then this would allow for the proposals in the bill on changing the release point for some short-term prisoners, and have also agreed to be implemented in early 2025. If implemented then, this could result in a sustained reduction to the sentence population of around 5%. While planning work is already underway, it is critical that the Scottish Prison Service has clarity as soon as possible about the final bill, so they can make the necessary preparations and work with the public sector and third sector organisations to prepare for release. Considerable planning, including with regard to the training of staff, recalculation of release dates and other system changes, all require urgent clarity in the form of the final bill. Progressing this bill on an emergency basis means the Scottish Prison Service can prepare, can plan and can implement the changes, if also agreed, of course, by this Parliament, at pace. Presiding Officer, of course, the approach taken in the bill will still be subject to Parliament's scrutiny as it proceeds through its parliamentary stages. The Government has aimed to maximise parliamentary scrutiny as far as is possible within the emergency procedure. That's why the proposed timetable does not follow the default timetable set out in standing orders that all stages of an emergency bill should be taken in one day. Instead, we have set out a timetable which allows Parliament to debate and, we hope, agree its general principles tomorrow, and then provides further time for scrutiny ahead of the amending stages in this chamber next Tuesday. I hope that members will agree that we must act urgently and collectively to address the critical nature of the high prison population and agreed to treat this bill under the emergency procedure in order to put in place a sustainable reduction to the prison population as soon as possible. Presiding Officer, with that, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Liam Kerr. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to speak against the motion to treat the Prisoners' Bill under the emergency procedure. This bill will make fundamental and permanent changes to the release point of short-term prisoners. They will be released automatically after serving only 40% of their sentence. It also reduces the scrutiny required should the government wish to do the same for long-term prisoners in the future. That is a fundamental change to what we do with convicted criminals. Yet the government asks us to vote it through on less than a week's scrutiny. Presiding Officer, the Minister suggests actions to address the prison population have been taken, and that's true. In an earlier panicked response this summer, this government released 477 convicted criminals. By mid-September, many were back in custody. Last year, this Parliament passed a law to reduce the numbers remanded. Yet today, we consider measures without there having been a formal assessment of the effectiveness of that legislation. Presiding Officer, what is clear is that the government has no coherent strategy to address the prison population. Instead, 2 seconds please, Mr Whitfield. Instead it seeks something, anything, that will keep criminals out of prison, whether or not it will actually impact numbers other than in the short term, and whether or not it is safe. Presiding Officer, without the full scrutiny that the normal bill process requires, this Parliament cannot help the government to ensure its knee-jerk measures will be effective and safe. Mr Whitfield.
Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful to the member to give way on this point. And isn't the reality that what we've been confronted with after publication is in fact two bills that have been pushed together, one in relation to short-term prisoners of 4 years or less, and one in relation to long-term prisoners. And there is an outcry that the long-term prisoners, including from Victim Support Scotland, are being put into this bill with a very short level of discussion with groups outside of this place, and actually the bill could achieve its ends by just being the first part with regard to short-term prisoners.
Liam Kerr.
I'm very grateful. I have to say, I think that's a really important point that's just been made. The government does appear to be grabbing power almost over the long-term prisoners under cover of a measure which has and will continue to get all of the attention. And I find that actually deeply sinister. Will I have time, Presiding Officer? Very briefly, please.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I wonder if Mr Kerr would agree that with any secondary legislation in this Parliament, that parliamentary approval, particularly in the affirmative motion, is always required, 56 laying days, with the right of things to come to plenary. And would he further agree that that's in sharp contrast with the previous UK government that, without a by or a leave to the UK Parliament, released 10,000 prisoners?
Liam Kerr.
I am, of course, well aware of the parliamentary process and the fact that this is Scotland's Parliament dealing with Scottish legislation. And the fact is, the legislation we are looking at, if this is treated as emergency legislation, are the representations of some of those who offered some preliminary thoughts early in the year without having seen the bill, such as the Prisons Inspectorate, saying that releasing these criminals may be insufficient to deal with the spike in the population. COSLA saying that there may be a significant risk that victims will lose confidence in the system. Victim Support stating there may be a legitimate threat to victims' personal safety. Or COSLA suggesting local authorities will struggle to provide adequate support to individuals leaving or diverted from custody. Nor will we be able to interrogate the effectiveness or feasibility of alternatives to custody, such as those the Cabinet Secretary rightly proposes in her interview with Holyrood magazine, or whether there's something to be done around foreign nationals in the prison population, or whether there's spare capacity within the prison system, such as at Polmont. Presiding Officer, without the usual scrutiny, considering evidence from experts concerning the wider impact on victims, on the public, on the criminals themselves, this Parliament will legislate in a vacuum as a knee-jerk reaction to a completely predictable situation. And keep in mind, unlike the COVID emergency legislation, for example, the provisions in this bill are not time limited. Once these changes are made, they are made. There is no sunset clause. There is no second chance. There is no going back, Presiding Officer. The Minister even highlighted that the bill's financial memorandum states this bill will result in a permanent 5% cut in the average prison population. What if it turns out that that has jeopardised public safety? And, Presiding Officer, the Minister praised the standing orders in aid. The legislative process set out in our standing orders was very carefully considered through the Scotland Act, the consultative steering group, drafting by officials and legal experts, then debate, amendment and formal adoption by the first Parliament to ensure adequate scrutiny and the bringing to bear of talents across this Parliament and civic society to avoid unintended consequences, costs and catastrophes. Today, we are being asked to ignore those and accept an emergency procedure on a bill which will make a permanent legal change. We have only the government's word that whilst previous initiatives have failed, that this is the solution. MSPs who vote to treat this as an emergency give this government a licence to push through a fundamental change to how we sentence, with minimum scrutiny and which will have profound and long-lasting impacts. I have too much respect for this place, too much concern for public safety and too much respect for the rule of law to accept this. I hope MSPs share that respect and will vote against the motion. Thank you.
I now call on Pauline McNeill.
The Parliament has been asked to agree that the Scottish Government can put emergency legislation before the Parliament, a bill that we only saw on Monday, to change the approach in Scottish prisons to the release of short-term and long-term prisoners. A substantial change in prison policy, and thereby denying the Scottish Parliament its role and the committee its scrutiny role over a change in policy, the right to call witnesses, the right to take its time, the right to decide who it wants to listen to, is going to be denied if we agree this emergency legislation tonight. Because, as Liam Kerr says, the Scottish Government are seeking permanent change to the way that we release prisoners, those serving a short-term sentence from 50% to 40% with some exclusions, even though the temporary release programme seemed to have its flaws, and we were back where we started in July of this year with the prison population back up to 8,300. With a number of those prisoners being back in jail during that period. As predicted, the revolving door, which is a major concern of those interested in prison policy. And I'm sure all parties agree that in short-term sentences it seems obvious that simply legislating to reduce time in jail without a more radical plan to tackle reoffending rates is a failure, and we should have the right to discuss that in more detail and the impact that it will have on victims and communities. Victims have the right for this Parliament to demonstrate that we put their concerns at the heart of it. And by rushing this through, by this week and next week, we're not going to do that. Indeed, victims' organisations are extremely concerned about the legislation and the fact that it will be fast-tracked, and they've had the experience of victims so far is that we've still yet to make significant improvements to our criminal justice system. I think it's unacceptable that the Scottish Government are saying that this is emergency legislation. When I think of some of the emergency legislation that we have passed, I had felt pretty mostly it has met the criteria, but this does not. But the most concerning aspect is the regulation power in the emergency bill, which indicates a significant change in policy that will apply to short-term prisoners but to long-term prisoners. Section 3 of the bill grants Scottish ministers a power to make future changes to automatic early release for short-term and long-term prisoners. Now, there was a major change to the release of long-term prisoners in 2015 and 2016. It was done by primary legislation. It was done by primary legislation because it's a very significant shift in prison policy, and it seems to have had an impact on the prison population. So if we're going to change the policy, is it not obvious that it should be done again by primary legislation to allow this Parliament to look at it? It seems odd that the Government are arguing that it is an emergency. In summary, Scottish Labour oppose this motion tonight for this to be treated as emergency legislation due to the fact that it is a substantial policy change, and the Parliament and its committee should have the right to examine in detail what impact it will have on the present population and whether in fact that the proposal will actually achieve its aim to sustainably reduce the present population. I don't think we can do that by looking at this legislation tomorrow and next week. I urge the Parliament to give proper scrutiny to this important policy piece of legislation and oppose the Government's proposals tonight.
Thank you. I now call on Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. Can I thank, firstly, Liam Kerr and Pauline McNeill, who I think very fairly set out the concerns that certainly I have, and I suspect many share. I suspect even the Justice Secretary herself shares many of those concerns. I'd also put on record my thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for engagement on this issue, not just in relation to the bill we're looking at the moment, but earlier on to previous initiatives in this area. I think the Minister set out rightly the rationale for emergency bills. They are a legitimate way of addressing extraordinary circumstances. I think, unfortunately, the more often we face those bills, the less extraordinary those circumstances would appear. And I acknowledge the fact that there are measures in place that will take time to take effect, but this is a problem that's been years in the making. We are where we are at present, and I think I would almost be prepared to accept the need for urgent action in relation to short-term prisoners. But I very much share the point that Martin Whitfield made in intervention to Liam Kerr, and that was backed up by Pauline McNeill, that this is in effect two bills in one, and that the provisions that the government's looking to bring forward through order-making powers in terms of long-term prisoners really does not do justice to some of the sensitivities and controversies there are around that issue, and where I think Parliament will want to take its time to consider the evidence that the Criminal Justice Committee would almost certainly wish to take. And on that basis, I think while the bill may proceed under emergency provisions at the moment, if that element of the bill in terms of Section 3 is not removed, I cannot see how this Parliament can pass that at Stage 3 next week. But I look forward to listening to the Minister's response to the concerns that have been raised, but very much echo those that have been articulated by Liam Kerr and Pauline McNeill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. I call on JV Hepburn to wind up to 5 minutes, Minister.
Thank you very much, President Officer. Can I, first of all, thank members for their contributions. I think it is important, if the Government seeks to bring forward an emergency bill, that we have the opportunity to debate the rationale for doing so. I would stand by the comments I made in my opening remarks about the emergency nature, the extreme circumstances we find in relation to the present population, and that necessitates the requirement for us to look at this on an emergency basis. It was mentioned by Mr Kerr, who I was just about to go on to, but I'll certainly happily give way.
Liam Kerr.
Very grateful. If the Minister concedes the point about the emergency to get people out, then why does he then concede the point that the long-term prisoners' ability to deal with that later could meaningfully be removed but achieve the same end?
Minister.
Well, we've laid out our position, I think, in terms of sustainability over the entire prison population. That has to be a factor as well. And of course, we seek to do that by the process of regulation-making powers, which would still be subject to the scrutiny and agreement of this Parliament. And of course, we would engage with people on that basis. But if we're going to look at the sustainability of the prison population so that those in that environment, and let's not forget those who work in that environment, can be in the safest possible environment, then we have to look at it across the whole. But I think it's important in debating whether or not we look at this on an emergency basis to place it in some context, of course, President Officer. And Mr Kerr and indeed Mr MacArthur referred to these points. It is not as if the Government is not trying to take action here and now to deal with this problem. We've taken action through the Scottish Prison Service to increase capacity in Polmont to try and assist with this matter. We're also looking to ensure that home curfew is optimised. We have increased the prison services resource budget, increasing funding by £14 million to further strengthen alternatives to custody across Scotland this year, and we have historically high levels of electronic monitoring, now over 2,200 people being monitored each day. So we are taking action right now. That will take some time to have effect, but we have an emergency situation before us now, and that requires us to act. And of course, I'll give way to Ms McNeill.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank the Minister for giving way. Would the Minister accept that if the bill was passed, so rather than, let's talk about the policy of long-term prisoners, this is the main argument we're putting to you, that we can't scrutinise it the same way you would if it was a committee, because if it's an SSI, would the Minister accept we can't amend the SSI? So we just have to accept what you put before us or not. And therefore, was it not think it's more in tune with the principles of the Parliament that you let us amend the policy when you decide to do it?
This comes back to the age-old issue that somehow secondary regulation making powers is subordinate or lesser to primary legislation. Is a perfectly legitimate way to make the law. I think I understand Mr MacArthur's intervention in a minute, but let me come back to the point. It is a perfectly legitimate way for us to make the law, and it is still scrutinised by this Parliament. And of course, when we take forward these changes, we do it on the basis of consultation, engagement, including with people in this place. Mr Kerr talked of the numbers of prisoners released, and of course there have been numbers released previously through the urgent process we take. But let's place this in context. This is not uniquely a Scottish challenge. This is a challenge across the entirety of the United Kingdom. Let's talk about what has happened under Conservative jurisdiction. Yes, it is about Scotland, but if we're going to hear from the Conservative benches about what we've done, let's hear from these benches about what the Conservatives have done in other parts of the United Kingdom. From October 2023 to July 2024, the Conservative UK Government released over 10,000 prisoners up to 70 days early to deal with overcrowded prisons. And this is a process that has continued under the current UK Government. Let's make clear, Presiding Officer, that wasn't done through primary legislation. That wasn't done with any form of parliamentary scrutiny. It was used through the end of custody supervised licence scheme, which had no recourse back to Parliament. So let's have the full context
Point of order, Liam Kerr.
I'm afraid, no, First Minister, this is a very important point. This is a debate about whether or not to treat this.
Mr. Kerr.
This is a debate about whether to treat this as emergency legislation or not. This is not a debate about the substance of the legislation. I'm afraid the Minister for Parliamentary Business has gone off.
Mr. Kerr, I think I am chairing this meeting, and I would ask that you remember that, please. Minister.
I think I touched a raw nerve there, Presiding Officer. Mr Kerr didn't seem confident enough to stand on his feet to seek to intervene. But let's come back to the process. Paul McNeill talked about the concerns of using the emergency process. I recognise, and I said this at the outset, this is not a process that should be utilised on a regular basis. Liam MacArthur rightly said, though, it is a legitimate process. Rule 9.21 of Standing Order sets out the special requirements of the emergency bill process. It specifies, of course, that it should ordinarily be done in a day. I'm not asking Parliament to agree with that. I'm seeking to build in additional time for scrutiny. Let us remind ourselves that all administrations have utilised the emergency process in the past, and where Pauline McNeill, and this is what astounded me, Pauline McNeill said that this set of circumstances does not meet the threshold for an emergency. Let me go back to what I said earlier. The prison population is often exceeding 8,300 this year. The latest prison population projections indicate the prison population will likely continue to increase into next year, reaching critical levels. We cannot jeopardise the safety of those in our prison environment, not least those who work in our prison environment. That's why we should treat this as an emergency bill.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Prisoners Early Release Scotland Bill Emergency Bill motion, and there is one question to be put. The question is that motion 15530, in the name of Jamie Hepburn, on Prisoners Early Release Scotland Bill Emergency Bill motion be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.